there's this huge Bosson glacier that you can't cross after a certain time because it melts too much. So you have to get it just right. And yeah, you're just jumping over all these crevasses and you look down and there's just sort of nothing but darkness. So you just have to look forward and jump.
Jumping crevasses on a glacier is dangerous enough in modern kit. Now imagine doing it in a 12-kilogram wool dress, a matching bonnet and hobnail boots. That is exactly what Lise Wortley did when she recreated the first descent of Mont Blanc by a woman, Henriette d'Angeville, in 1838. This was the latest expedition as part of her project, Women with Altitude, where Lise researches and retraces the journeys of women adventurers from history and going that extra step by wearing exactly what they wore. The corsets, the trousers hidden under skirts, the heavy leather boots that fill with water, all to get a deeper understanding of how hard these challenges really were and to uncover the details which are left out of the history books. I'm Hugh Taylor and you're listening to The Art of Adventure, a podcast brought to you by Arthur Bill, outfitters to sailors, adventurers, explorers and vagabonds for over 500 years. And today we're asking, what does it take to climb a mountain like it's 1838? Thank you very much for joining us. We're really excited to have you. But I thought just before we got on to Henriette, it would be good to talk about Mont Blanc, because everybody's heard of Mont Blanc and everybody, or probably quite a lot of people, think it's not that hard to climb and lots of people have done it. And I think a bit of history about Mont Blanc and actually the dangers of climbing Mont Blanc would be good to know.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mont Blanc, because it's seen as, well, it's the highest mountain in Europe, obviously, but it's seen as one of the more accessible mountains because there's no technical climbing if you go the route I went or the route that everybody else goes, the sort of modern route to the summit. But the problem is if the weather changes or if you're not with a guide or if you're not entirely sure what you're doing, it can actually be really fatal. And I think people were going up and just not really knowing what they were doing and thinking, oh, it's an easy sort of walk to the top. And it is tough. It's really tough. And you need a certain level of fitness and it's really high altitude. So it can be quite a forgiving mountain, but it can also be quite treacherous if you're there at the wrong time in the wrong conditions and you're not sure what you're doing. There's also, at the moment, because of the weather getting warmer and things like that, there's a lot of rockfall during the months that people climb it, which has made it a lot more dangerous. So there's this one bit on the modern route that people cross now, and it's getting more and more dangerous because the permafrost is melting. So that's the very ancient layer of ice that's holding in a lot of the big rocks, and it's slowly melting. So the rockfall is becoming more frequent. So again, if there's too much rockfall, you can't go up. It's too risky. So there's a lot of elements to climbing Mont Blanc that I think lots of people don't quite realise. And it's a high mountain, so it comes with a lot of dangers.
And I think it was first climbed, I think it was the end of the 18th century, was it 1786? And so coming into the 19th century, it has never been climbed by a woman doing it on her own. But Henriette came along, and tell us all about Henriette and her background and what she set out to do.
Yeah, so I think it was 30 years after the first men climbed it that one woman went up called Marie Paradis, and there's a whole thing about her story that I won't go into now, but it's fascinating. And she was apparently carried to the summit, that final push, because she couldn't do it on her own. So then years later after that, another woman called Henriette d'Angeville decided she wanted to be the first woman to go up unaided. So she kind of set her heart on going up Mont Blanc and becoming the first woman to do it. And it's just this incredible story. She went with this whole group of sort of male guides and porters and had this incredible outfit, which we'll get onto, I'm sure, which is why I was sort of drawn to her story in the first place. And yeah, she managed to do it, and at a time when women just didn't do that sort of thing. You know, they weren't even supposed to wear trousers, which she had underneath her dress. So this was 1838, so a time when women just didn't do that sort of thing. And yeah, she broke down all these barriers and sort of paved the way for a lot of mountaineers, female mountaineers. But yeah, it's quite an astonishing story.
And obviously in those days, the equipment to sort of climb Mont Blanc was relatively restricted. But tell us a bit about what she did take up the mountain with her and what her sort of porters carried to help her with the journey.
This is quite funny. So I think she writes it all down in her book, which for me is great because often when I'm researching women like her, it's really hard to find the detail, but she was so thorough. And they had something crazy like 18 bottles of wine and 24 roast chickens, 3 legs of mutton, like all this stuff that they had. And it sounds crazy to us, but actually back then they didn't have weather apps or phones like we do today. They couldn't check, what was going to happen. So they always took a lot more stuff than they actually needed. But yeah, she had this outfit that she made herself because outdoor clothing for women didn't exist back then. So it was quite a big thing that she made that I managed to recreate. It was this 12-kilogram heavy woolen dress with a matching bonnet.
And is the reason she took so many bottles of wine because they didn't trust the water?
I think that's why, looking into it, they used to just drink wine because that was the cleanest thing to drink. I mean, obviously they would have had snow up there as well, but it takes a long time to melt big amounts of snow. Yeah, now you think, if you've been on a big walk, you can relate to how thirsty you get. It doesn't feel quite right washing it down with red wine. You feel like you need water. But back then, I think they just drank a lot of wine.
Had she climbed other mountains before?
Yeah, so she was actually quite a prolific mountaineer by the end. She climbed all these peaks, and I think she was climbing into her 60s. She climbed the Oldenhorn was the last mountain, but yeah, she'd done a lot of walking, and actually she was from a much higher class. She was kind of very privileged and had a lot of money, so could do these things, whereas a lot of other people couldn't. So that gave her a lot of access to the outdoors and to go on trips to the Alps and things like that they did back then. So yeah, so she'd been climbing for a while before she attempted this.
But what happened to Henriette afterwards?
Yeah, so she was actually really successful sort of after the climb, and she got all this publicity, and at the time it was sort of this thing that everyone was talking about, and she'd had a lot of people doubting her and saying that she shouldn't be doing it. But then she wrote her book, and she was quite famous at the time, and then her name sort of died out of history like a lot of the women that I research. And interestingly, she's on the mural in the centre of Chamonix. There's this new mural that they've painted, and it's all men apart from this one woman on there, and she's there. But I was sort of standing there saying to people, "Oh, do you know who this woman is?" And nobody knew. So I do feel like her story is kind of, although it's maybe resurfacing a little bit now, it got sort of completely lost. And yeah, people just don't really know who she was, like a lot of the women. So I think, yeah, she did well for the climb, and she got her book out. And then, yeah, I think just her name just sort of got buried a bit after that.
And how did you come across her?
So I've got my project, obviously, where I research sort of adventurous women from history that people don't know about or have been really overlooked. And I think I was looking at Mont Blanc because I thought, well, it's so close to us and it's a mountain that everybody knows, but literally nobody knows who the first woman was who climbed it. And that's how I came across her. And then I found her book that it's called My Ascent of Mont Blanc that she wrote a couple of years after her climb. And it's actually really funny and really well written, and just kind of feels like it was written the other day, just a woman doing something recently. So I just got really hooked on her story, and then just started to uncover all these amazing facts, like she took a pigeon to the summit with her to release, so that it could tell the people in the town that they'd made it, and just things like that. And when you compare it to today, there were just all these things that I wanted to find out, like how did she actually make it to the top in that dress? See, I just became a little bit obsessed with her story and just sort of continued looking into it, and then ended up doing it.
Yeah, fantastic. And obviously at that time, there was sort of mountaineering clothing for men. But because obviously women didn't or weren't expected to climb, there was no mountaineering equipment. And as you said, she went in a dress, but how did it compare to men's mountaineering equipment and clothing?
I mean, it was completely different. And she just thought, what is going to get me to the top? What's going to be the most useful? And I'm going to design that. So she actually got wool from Scotland to make it, because that was the wool that everyone wanted at the time. So it's kind of thick and warm and ever so slightly waterproof. So she made the trousers, because that's obviously a lot easier to climb, but she couldn't have them showing. So then she designed this massive big dress. And it's really not a typical outfit from the time. So it's just this interesting thing that she put together, which is a bit of a mishmash between the male clothes that were often mostly hidden and then the women's clothing on top. But it's not a typical outfit from the time, and it's this big sort of tartan pattern thing, massive puffy dress, and then the matching bonnet, because again, women shouldn't really go out without their bonnets back then. So it's quite an ensemble.
And you were obviously so fascinated and taken by the story, you decided to recreate her ascent of Mont Blanc in identical clothing all the way down to your underwear.
Yeah, I like to keep it all the same. And it's really because actually at the time, this all started for me because when I was reading the books that these women had written when they'd gone on these big adventures, they were really missing things in detail about how they really felt, or whether their corsets were itching, or what, you know, whether they were doing all right in their bras and what was happening. And because they were trying to, you know, be taken seriously as the men at the time. So there was all this information missing. And I thought actually the only way to truly kind of understand what they went through is to wear the old stuff. So I take it quite seriously and I do exactly what they would have had. And often it's kind of research, you know, what they had. And interestingly, a lot of women who were climbing mountains, they weren't in their corsets because they'd be like, well, why should I wear? No one can see under there and it's just holding me back. So they'd often remove them and just kind of climb a bit more freely. So yeah, so I go right down to everything they had just so that I can sort of really fully understand on a bit of a deeper level what they would have gone through.
But the other interesting thing is, you know, we talked about the fatalities on Mont Blanc, and actually what you're doing was not without risk. There are times when you've got to sort of leap over crevasses and you are in this costume that is absolutely not really made for climbing. Talk us through a bit about that.
So when you're jumping over the crevasses, usually you're just in a pair of trousers, so your legs could kind of part and you can jump over, whereas I was having to pick the dress up, hold onto the bonnet, make sure the crampons and the shoes weren't going to catch on this dress that was way too long and sort of overflowing. And the climbing as well were the bits that were a bit more technical, and, you know, you're holding onto the bonnet, but it's sort of hitting the rock because it's so big, and it just makes it a lot more difficult. And I often thought about what she would have been feeling when she was surrounded by the guys that were probably just jumping over the crevasses, and then they would like help her over, and perhaps she would struggle a bit more because she's in this huge ridiculous outfit, and you know, they didn't have to wear a huge heavy dress over the top. So it's just actually when you're in those situations, you're thinking about her and you're thinking, wow, like to actually be in this situation with a whole group of guys who are probably finding it a little bit more easy, you know, it is a huge undertaking. But yeah, I think the clothing definitely, yeah, it makes it a lot more tricky. And the shoes as well, they're heavy. They've started to fill with water because they were just made of leather. So it just makes the whole thing a lot more difficult. And I think I just go into it aware that I'm going to struggle a lot more than everybody else. And if I'm holding us all up, then I'm holding us all up, you know.
You didn't think during it, what am I doing? Because,
oh, yeah.
You know, when I actually see you doing the jumping, as you said, sort of trying to hold the dress and keep that, it looks quite precarious.
No, it is. It really is. And it's, you know, you don't really know what's going to happen up there. And that was the glacier that we crossed. So actually, most people who climb Mont Blanc don't go that original route via the Grand Mullet, which we went, which is the way that everybody used to go. But there's this huge Bosson glacier that you can't cross after a certain time because it melts too much. So you have to get it just right. And yeah, you're just jumping over all these crevasses and you look down and there's just sort of nothing but darkness. So you just have to look forward and jump. But yeah, it was tough, and you just have to sort of do it. And when you're there, you think, what am I doing? But also, I don't really want to turn back, so I'll just jump.
And you obviously had a local guide with you. I mean, what was she thinking of what you were doing and the clothes you were wearing? And bear in mind, she would be, she's very aware of the risks and and the accidents that do happen on the mountain.
Yeah, so she was called Karen, and she was absolutely brilliant. So she actually was the one who told me that only 2% of mountain guides in France are women. So that's why one part of my project is to try and keep the whole team women. So it's about supporting women in the adventure and outdoor space. So I hunt for women guides whenever I climb mountains or if I do a long trek or something. And they're always so hard to find. And she's actually probably the most experienced mountain guide I've ever come across. She actually trains the new guides that are coming in at the school in Chamonix. And yeah, I think she just heard about the project and just loved the idea. And actually she said, I don't really guide up Mont Blanc anymore because I find it a bit boring. But she just loved the project so much that she just bought a book actually that had Henriette in it. So it was just this really nice sort of thing that happened. And yeah, she was great.
Okay, so you found the great guide. You've done all your prep. Can you walk us through your actual expedition itself?
Yeah, so we went for the first time in 2024, and it was this. I'd raised another thing about these trips. I have to raise all the money, and it becomes this, really quite big, stressful thing. So there's a lot riding on it, and it was a little bit later in the season. So I basically wanted to try and summit the same day that she did, so the 4th of September, I think. But when you then try and climb Mont Blanc later in the season, it's got a lot hotter over the summer. So there's a huge amount of rockfall. You can't go the original route, so we had to make the decision to go the modern route with everybody else. And we set off, and we knew that the weather was changing a bit, but it came in so quickly, and we sort of nearly got to the first hut. So we really didn't get very far. And I sort of looked over at Karen, and she looked very concerned, sort of looking at her phone, looking at the weather. Other people were sort of turning round. And I just thought, oh no, this isn't going to happen, is it? So yeah, it was really disappointing. We made this, you listen to the guide in those situations, and if the guide's telling you you're not going to get up and down in time before this storm comes in, and actually, it was a good decision. Like, really sadly, I think 4 people lost their lives the day after because they tried to go up and they got stuck. And when the weather's really bad, the rescue helicopters can't get to them, so you end up getting stuck on the mountain. So we definitely made the right decision. But obviously, it's when you've built the trip up that much and you have your heart set on something. So we decided to come back down, and actually we went and we climbed the Oldenhorn, which was the last mountain that Henriette ever climbed before she died. So, we had a good ending, and still people were really interested in the trip and her story. And again, it got a lot of press, and people were actually interested in the fact that we didn't make it, and that didn't really matter because we were still sort of sharing these incredible stories and supporting women in this space. So yeah, we decided to come back down, and then I sort of thought, well, I won't give it another go. But then I got a bit lucky with some funding, and yeah, we decided we would go again this year and try again, and we'll go a bit earlier and try the original route.
And it's interesting talking about the funding, and sorry to ask a direct question. How to do what you're doing, how much does each trip cost, or how much do you need to raise?
No, I love talking about funding because no one else ever does. And I love
Right.
being really open about it. So to actually do the trip, it's probably like just me on my own with no camera crew, not making a film. It would probably be about 5,000. But as soon as you want to film it and you want to make a film and you're bringing multiple people, so all in all, the whole film probably costs about 42,000, including the trip. And that is really cheap for a film, which I've learned all this stuff, I didn't know any of this before. If you'd said that to me before, I'd have been like, how much? But you just have to keep going, and you get so many rejections, but you have to keep trying. So it's mentally very draining, sort of getting the funding, which is why I mentioned that, because, if you go on this trip and you can't do what you've set out to do, and sometimes brands are involved and you sort of told them, this is what I'm going to be doing, it's stressful, and it can be really sort of disappointing and worrying. But yeah, everyone was lovely about it, and the trip did quite well anyway. But yeah, so it varies, really varies.
Yeah. So when you got back, obviously you sort of thought perhaps you weren't going to have another attempt at doing this. And did someone then approach you with money, or did you suddenly think, well, maybe I'll give it a go and try a couple of sponsors?
Yeah, so a bit of both. So we really not got far up the mountain. So Grace, who wanted to make the film, was like, I think we should give it another go. I think you should. And I had the whole outfit ready to go. So I was like, okay, I'll just put a few feelers out there, see what happens. We managed to get a bit of funding, but not really enough. And then I just put something on LinkedIn and somebody saw it. And that's how, we got enough to actually go and make the film properly. So that's how it sort of all happened. But I did really want to go back because I wanted to try the original route. And I didn't even care how far we got up there with it. I just wanted to try and get up the mountain a bit more in that outfit that we'd made and to tell her story a bit more. So it was really special and incredible that we could go that original route because it's such a tiny window that you can do it. And we were the only people there. So the modern route's actually quite busy now, and you end up in sort of lines, and there's people sort of, climbing all around you. But the route we went was totally empty, just this vast open space. It was brilliant.
Is the original route harder?
Yeah, so it's the final climb to the summit. So there's only one hut on the original route, and we left from the centre of Chamonix town. So we walked from there, whereas if you do the modern route, you get a bus to the next town along, you then get a cable car up and then a train sort of a little bit further up. So you're kind of lifted to quite a height already. And then it's the shortest way to the summit, basically, which is why the companies do it, and it's the commercial route. But the original route, we started at the church of the town centre where she started. So the whole climb, you're climbing the entire way. And then the final push to the summit is 1,800 meters, whereas the modern route is 800 from the last time. So you're doing 1,000 meters more of climbing than everybody else. And it's funny because at the very end, you join the modern route. So by that point, I was so tired and out of it. I kind of forgot that I was in this crazy, ridiculous outfit, just walking kind of up this thing. And then suddenly all these people were there. And I just sort of forgot that I was in a strange outfit and getting all these sort of looks, but also lots of encouraging smiles and cheers. So.
And how long does it take from the church in Chamonix to get to the top? How long did it take you?
It took us 2.5 days to get to the summit. Right. So you leave the church and then you sleep wild sort of on the mountainside like she did just before the glacier, and then you cross the glacier the next day, and then that's where this little hut is that you sleep in, and then the next day you summit. So yeah, about the whole trip sort of 3.5-4 days in total.
And was it quite problem free, that the sort of second ascent?
It was problem-free, but it was tough, and the weather kept changing. We weren't sure if we could do it. There was a lot of highs and lows. We were originally meant to sort of acclimatise for another day at the hut that you get to, but the weather was changing, so we thought we'll just go for it. We'll just go in the morning, and then that morning is you get up at sort of 1 a.m. and you're summiting at sort of 10 a.m. And then that's only halfway because you have to come the whole way back down, which was probably the most painful part of the whole trip. And Karen says, like, up is optional, but down is obligatory. So, once you're at the top, you have to come down, and it's just as far as you've come up. So you're only halfway, really, when you're on the summit.
And did you walk all the way down?
Yeah, we had to. It was the original route. There's no other way. And that was the really painful bit, because by that point, it's ice going up because you're walking in pitch black at night, but coming down, the sun's melted it. So it's deep snow. So every footstep is sort of plunging into this deep snow, and my boots were getting full of water. And there was a couple of tears on the way down, I have to admit.
Excellent. And not many people choose to do the original route then, even though it's longer, or because it's longer, they just don't do it.
Yeah, there was one other climber who was a guide on our route, and nobody else goes because they book with the companies, which is the good thing to do. It's a safe thing to do, but the companies will take you the shortest route. And because there's 2 huts on the modern route, it then gives them more backup. If someone's not doing very well or they're struggling, they can leave them at the hut. Whereas the original route that we went, it's quite brutal because it's such a long climb to the summit that if something did happen to someone it's just easier for them. Plus, they can do that longer in the season because you don't have to cross the glacier.
And if somebody was listening to this and decided that they wanted to try and climb Mont Blanc, what sort of fitness levels have you got? What climbing experience have you got?
It's interesting because I don't really have any technical climbing experience. I learned quite a lot before I went. I learned the ropes and the knots, and I went on, did a few climbs, but I'm actually terrified of heights, so I'd never really been much of a climber. But yeah, this time was better because I'd obviously been training the year before, and then I sort of just carried on my trainings. And also I knew that I'm in this old stuff and it's heavy and it's hard, so I have to be fitter than everybody else. But I think if you just do loads of squats, you'll be fine. I just trained in the gym in London because there's no mountains around here. So yeah, I think I would just say, just go to the gym and just try and get your legs a bit stronger. Because essentially it's just your legs just stepping for hours on end.
Lots of stair climb machines.
Yeah, that's literally it. That's what I did. In a backpack, or squats on the stair climber, and you'll be fine. Just keep doing that.
When you were growing up, were you going for long hikes? Were you climbing up mountains? Did you discover this in later life? What was the journey to get to where you are here?
Yeah, it's interesting because I grew up in the middle of the countryside. So it's like, well, I was born in London, then my parents moved to the countryside, and I grew up quite a wild child. And then, just always outside in the woods, building dens. And then when I got to sort of being a teenager, I just didn't really go into the outdoors anymore. I just wanted to be in the city and the towns, with my friends. And I actually found a book by a woman explorer called Alexandra David Neal when I was about 16, and that's kind of what started this whole project. And I read it when I was 16, and I always thought, I'd love to sort of follow in her footsteps because nobody I speak to knows who this woman is. And then
what did she do? What was her accomplishment?
So Alexandra she's probably one of the more well-known sort of women travellers from the early 1900s. And she went on this 14-year journey sort of through Asia, searching for kind of the secrets to Buddhism. And she was the first Western woman to meet the Dalai Lama. She sort of lived for 2 years in a cave in the Himalayas, sort of learning to meditate. And she sort of brought Buddhism in a way back to the West. And she influenced lots of people like the beat poets and people like that. So she was this sort of traveller, basically, who became quite famous. And I sort of read her book, and it was quite magically written, and it was quite amazing. And then sort of life carried on, and I had quite a bad time with my mental health in my 20s. And when I started to feel better, I sort of went back to this book, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to do this trip, and I'm going to wear what she had, just kind of, because the book's full of incredible things. Like, she just sleeps sort of on her own in her yak wool coat on the mountainside, and she lived in her cave for 2 years just doing tumo breathing, which keeps you warm from the inside. And I just thought, how did she do that? How did she do it? And no one knew who she was. So that's how it sort of started, and I got into it. And then I came back from that trip and got lots of press coverage from it, and people were really interested because they'd never heard of her. And that's kind of what spurred it on. And I just kept researching and finding more women. And so that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah, fantastic. And actually, I've seen the footage of that trip, because you actually go to that cave where she lived for 2 years.
Yeah, we found the cave.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It was pretty small, wasn't it?
I mean, it was tiny, but she actually apparently built like an extra bit on the front. But it was really small, and it was really cold. So living there for 2 years just on your own, it's, quite unthinkable, really, how she did that.
Brilliant. Obviously, all these adventurers that you're getting to know and you're following in their footsteps, what sort of connection do you end up feeling with them? Because you research them so much, and you're retracing their steps and wearing what they wore, and obviously you understand what's going in their personal lives as well. How much of that affects you, or how much sympathy and empathy do you have with them?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that actually when you read their books, they hide a lot, and they never say if they were scared or if they were, missing people at home or things like that, or what the outfit actually felt like. So a lot of it, I guess, is feeling a bit closer to them, and also being in awe. So someone like Henriette, she did that back then. She was surrounded by a group of men in this clothing that actually does make you feel quite vulnerable, and you just have this deeper understanding of what they did, and it's way more impressive. And I would always just think, they're so brave to be able to go and do that. And then I sort of channel that braveness and try and take that with me and try and use that. But yeah, it's really interesting. And I think people always say, do you feel like you're becoming them, or do you feel like you're acting, or you're sort of, you're being that person? But I never feel like I'm becoming that person. I just feel like I'm getting a little taster of maybe what they would have gone through, and just how brave and groundbreaking they were, because they were probably feeling the same sort of fears as I was, jumping over crevasses and climbing rock faces, or walking for miles, whatever the adventure was. I think they probably had the same fears, and knowing that they sort of done it before, I guess, kind of helps me get through it, knowing that they can do it, so I can as well.
Yeah, and in a funny sort of way there, I mean, obviously, as you said earlier, you weren't sort of training your whole life for this. And they probably, in their earlier lives, were probably training to be ladies of their time and not gearing up for adventure. So there's a sort of similarity there that, you're not an elite athlete, but you've just, adapted and taken on these very real challenges, which again is quite awe-inspiring.
Yeah, and I always think, and I know it sounds really cliche, but like people are actually way more capable of things than they think they are. Like I never thought I'd be able to sort of climb Mont Blanc. And again, that's what I've sort of taken from these women, is that they did these extraordinary things. And quite often, a lot of the women I researched, they never really meant to end up on the expeditions they were on, or they were brought on as interpreters or seamstresses. You know, they weren't there to be adventurers, but something happened and they ended up in this situation and they sort of thrived in it and did really, really well. And I think that's really inspiring as well. And that's something that everyone can take away, because a lot of people, you know, we don't always push ourselves. The way we live today, you know, we've got a lot of comforts, and, you know, it's just really nice to know and quite comforting to know that you can, you know, you're capable of a lot more than you think you are. And that's something that I get from these women as well. And yeah, they were probably at the time thinking, oh, I never knew I could do that. That's great. And then other women were seeing it. And yeah, I just think it's brilliant.
And you've obviously, I mean, you've recreated the journeys of several women over the years. Who's going to be the next ones?
Oh, there's so many. I have a list of about 150, 200 women. I'm really, really keen at the moment on women from the UK, because there's so many cool ones. I don't know. Have you ever heard of Dorothy Pilley?
No.
She's this incredible climber from, I think she's from Camberwell down the road in London. And yeah, she just did all this climbing all over Europe, you know, the first woman up all these ascents. And again, she wrote this book that never got published, but I think her great nephew found it, something while he was clearing out something, and they got it republished, and it's now this sort of really popular book. It's incredibly funny. But yeah, I'd love to do a series on the UK women. And there's also a cyclist called Annie Londonderry, who was the first woman to cycle around the world. I'd love to try and recreate some of her journey on an old bike, because she literally just left with a massive corset dress on and one little bag, like on the handlebars, and she went all around the world. So yeah, I'd love to sort of follow in her footsteps on, you know, a bike with no gears from 1870. It's just crazy.
Yeah. And obviously not carbon fibre, probably cast iron. Or,
very heavy, I imagine. And she went through the Alps and everything. I think, how did she get up those windy roads?
That's incredible. And you call yourself, or you're, you know, woman without altitude, but actually it's not all about altitude, is it? If you are following people who are cycling around the world or walking across deserts. So it's your sort of remit is all female explorers, adventurers?
Yeah, so anyone who did anything adventurous that was kind of overlooked at the time. So it could be doing really long walks or polar stuff or things like that. So yeah, I think I went with Women with Altitude because it was a little bit catchy. But yeah, it kind of encompasses all women. And then also the project kind of helps women today get into the sort of outdoor and adventure space. So it's become this sort of whole big project, which is brilliant and something I never thought it would do.
Lise, that has been absolutely fantastic. A really good insight into these explorers, and especially Henriette, and a great insight into you as well, and what you've achieved and what you've done and what you're championing. So thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, and thanks very much for having me. It's been great.
That's all for this episode. If you want to follow Lisa's adventures and find out more about the women she's researching, you can find Woman with Altitude on Instagram. We'll put a link in the show notes. This series is brought to you by Arthur Bill. We've been outfitting sailors, adventurers, explorers and vagabonds for over 500 years. Find out more at arthurbill.co.uk. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe wherever you're listening. Next week, Helen Sharman, the first Brit in space. This show was hosted by me, Hugh Taylor, and produced by M. Wally. Theme music is by Nassan Da Silva.